Welcome to For the Record with Greenwood Law.
Hello and welcome to For the Record with Greenwood Law with attorney Dylan W. Greenwood, founder of Greenwood Law in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Dylan is a criminal defense attorney representing clients in both state and federal court, known for his high-level, personalized representation and hands-on approach to every case. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're talking about how North Carolina handles drug trafficking charges and why they're treated so differently from simple possession. Dylan, welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, glad to chat with you. These are always interesting topics. But before we get to it, could you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you build Greenwood Law, and what led you to focus so heavily on criminal defense in North Carolina?
Well, born and raised here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Love this area. Went off to school initially at Virginia Tech and then came back for law school at Wake Forest. And while I was here, I interned with the Federal Public Defender's Office for a couple of summers and really got exposed to this kind of work, and it lit a fire under me. And ever since then, I've known it's something that I wanted to be a part of. And so upon graduating, I did everything that I could to work on this, to work on myself, to build up my skills in and out of the courtroom, and to develop the tool belt to handle these types of cases on a regular basis.
So, important question. Do you root for Virginia Tech in football, or do you root for Wake Forest?
Virginia Tech.
All right. Yeah. Well, only can go up, right?
Right. Yeah, a little bit of a rough year, but we'll get there. We'll get back to prominence.
Always do. Yeah. So let's get to our topic here. When people hear drug trafficking, they often imagine, organized crime, cross-state operations. But under North Carolina law, what does drug trafficking actually mean?
And, those thoughts are not necessarily wrong. I mean, and really, and on a federal level, when I do these types of cases, I do deal with a fair amount of that type of thing. But when it comes to North Carolina's specific approach to drug trafficking, it is not always that kind of setup. It's not always organized crime or a cartel or, what people think of when they think of like drug trafficking in the news. In North Carolina, and I mean, really in federal court as well, but they have their own slant with how they approach it. But North Carolina, it is a weight specific thing. So it doesn't necessarily matter what your activities are outside of the substance involved. It literally matters how much of it you have. So there are actually these cases or situations where people have gotten prescription medication from someone else that they didn't, it's a controlled substance that wasn't theirs. And all of a sudden they've got a full pill bottle's worth of it. Well, if you go by the letter of the law and you look at the weight or the number of pills or whatever else, that could be a trafficking amount inadvertently. And then all of a sudden you're under this separate set of very serious regulations, rules, and penalties associated with drug trafficking versus normal possession or possession with intent to sell and deliver type offenses.
So the intent to sell comes from the weight. That's their way of getting there.
So that is not necessarily the case. When you have possession offenses, when you have possession with intent to sell or deliver, and then you have trafficking is really predicated on weight. And there are different ways to potentially traffic. And so there's traffic by transportation, traffic by possession, traffic by conspiracy. And there's all these different forms of trafficking. And that actually matters because North Carolina has a First Step Act where basically if you have like trafficking by possession, for instance, and it's the first time you've ever been convicted of anything, there are certain forms of relief that you can get if you tick off every single solitary box. And it's not the easiest thing to do. Mm-hmm. That's different, however, than those other types of possession crimes. So in possession with intent to sell and deliver, there's got to be some sort of extra evidence of what your intent with the substance was. So a lot of times it's because like some form of paraphernalia is present, like scales, baggies, packaging materials type things, those are present, and in addition to the substance, which would potentially, not all the time, but potentially lead one to believe that maybe there was an extra intent to sell or deliver versus just possessing the substance.
Okay, that makes sense. So what kind of penalties or mandatory minimums are we talking about here? If a case is labeled as trafficking?
They're steep. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest with you. And they're very hard hitting and heavy hitting. When it comes to drug trafficking in the state of North Carolina, every single form of it has a mandatory minimum, and they are separate and apart from the normal grid that we have for felonies or even misdemeanors and what that sentencing looks like. So at the lowest level, so let's take trafficking of marijuana. It's a Class H felony, but a Class H felony normally in the state of North Carolina is a lot more difficult to have active time on in a lot of jurisdictions because it's one of the lower level felonies you have. And most people don't get to the areas of the sentencing chart, but based off their criminal history category, that would put them in a situation where they're really likely to receive an active sentence or an extended active sentence. That's different for drug trafficking. With drug trafficking, that Class H, so if you're convicted of the drug trafficking for marijuana at the Class H, you're looking at a mandatory minimum of 25 months in prison. There's no question to that. That's going to happen, and there's nothing that you can really do about it. Then on top of it, here's a bit of a strategy that the state uses at times, where if you have a certain weight or there's different packages within a car or a house or wherever they find the substances, then they will actually potentially charge them as multiple different counts. And drug trafficking, specifically in North Carolina, does not allow you to run those counts concurrent in sentencing. They have to run consecutive. So you serve one sentence, then the other, each mandatory minimum, and they can't run concurrent. So all of a sudden you're looking at potentially stacking, and there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of strategy that rolls into that, but it can really be heavy-handed. At the highest end of drug trafficking in the state of North Carolina, for the most serious types of substances that you have, so think like methamphetamine, that sort of thing, you're looking at, and if you have the highest weight, you're looking at a mandatory minimum of 225 months. So that's a little less than 19 years.
Wow.
That you could be facing for something like that. And that's a weird situation for somebody to potentially be in, because sometimes when you're looking at the relationship between state cases and federal cases, that is one of the odd areas in which potentially somebody could get better relief in the federal system versus the state system, given what North Carolina's penalties are. And that is a very rare thing, typically speaking.
Wow, that's a long time. Almost 20 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah, that's not messing around. From your experience, how do these cases generally start? Are they search warrants, traffic stops? Like where do they begin?
Any and all the above. Sometimes they start because someone else was picked up and they give information and you work up this chain, so to speak. That's pretty common when it comes to federal cases. And a lot of federal drug trafficking cases start off as a state case because, we have two systems of government here in our country. And so you can be charged under both, and there's a relationship dynamic between those two. From a practical standpoint, though, a lot of them, I would say the majority that I see do start in some form of another as a traffic stop. That's because they usually have to be transported in some way. North Carolina is unique in the sense that I believe that it still does have the most federally funded highway miles of any state in the country.
Really?
Yes.
So, I would guess that.
Yeah, you've got Highway 40, 85, 95, 77, 52. I mean, all of them run through them. If you think of those as veins, And where stuff comes in, across the country, whether it comes into a port in Florida and runs up 95 here, or it comes, it starts in Texas and runs up, 85 through Atlanta into here. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that can flow. And a lot of times that's running through the highway system and in a car. The thing that is difficult about that is that the way our Fourth Amendment jurisprudence has flowed over the years, you have a lower expectation of privacy in a car. So it's easier to search a car. It's easier for law enforcement to potentially find stuff. There are ways that stop could be extended for law enforcement to find that, to bring in canines, whatever it may be. It's different than a house. You usually have to have pretty strong evidence that something is occurring in a house with a search warrant to be able to enter into a home. And that can happen. I've seen that, to be sure. But a lot of times you have cars that get searched easier without a search warrant, but there's valid probable cause or an exception to the search warrant rule that applies that's easier to get to.
Okay. So how does the state and federal prosecutors handle things differently, especially when the quantities or circumstances overlap? Because you mentioned that a little bit before, but every state has their own rules, and then you have federal rules too. Like, how do they kind of intertwine? The
best way I can relay that is that in a federal sense, there appears to be more of a long game. There's a strategy because there is a unit, a group, a line of people that you're trying to work up, basically, to try to see how far you can get up an organization or a conspiracy, and to actually try to find sources. That seems to be the federal strategy. Whatever that source may be, where's the source? State court does not have that same relationship, or state prosecution does not have that same relationship, because in the federal realm, U.S. attorneys and federal law enforcement, so think Homeland Security, DEA, ATF, FBI, work very, very, very closely together. So you have U.S. attorneys that are directly involved in an investigation, more so than you would ever have in a state case. And so because of that, it does affect the overall long-term strategy related to it. And so your approach has to be different, because they might want someone to provide information or something like that could significantly impact someone's case.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the common mistakes that you see defendants make early in these cases that really affect them negatively later?
Talking too much.
I had a feeling you might say that.
Talking way too much. I don't know if it's because there's this perception that if you cooperate, things will go better for you. I mean, I've watched plenty of body-worn camera footage where that is certainly either outright stated or implied. But also too, and I guess some people just don't think it's going to be found. But more often than not, either talking too much about what's going on or consenting to searches that you don't have to consent to.
Oh, interesting.
And I see that happen a lot. And, you're analyzing a case and you think you have a good one as an attorney to potentially file what's called a motion to suppress, because, you're going, oh man, this officer should have never done this, that, whatever. And then all of a sudden you get to a point in discovery and you read that your client has said, yeah, it's no problem. You can search my car. It's no big deal. I'll talk to you. I'll say, whatever you want me to say, kind of thing. And you're like, oh, okay. That our whole case is now just definitely changed.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest thing that I see as an issue.
When you're building a defense strategy for a trafficking charge, what are the main things you look for in discovery or police reports that can shift the outcome?
That's a great question, because really every case is different. And I like to think of myself almost like a doctor in a way of like trying to find like the root cause, and almost like a surgeon where you're going to that root cause and you're trying to address it and like just trying to get right in there on it. And so every case is different. So I've had drug trafficking cases where it's very apparent that someone has a significant drug issue, and both from a legal standpoint, so putting someone in the best position possible within the legal justice system, but also from a personal standpoint, because we really try to invest hard in our clients as people. And when we see these types of issues, we try to push people really hard to seek help. That can range from what people can afford, if it's something that is offered, that's subsidized through the state, or all the way up to some form of inpatient rehab. I have had clients where I have watched a metamorphosis literally wash over them as they've cleaned up in these types of significant cases. And then I've been able to relay that to a prosecutor, even show it sometimes, or to a judge. And then all of a sudden, somebody's drug trafficking case, maybe the plea isn't trafficking anymore, but sometimes it can go down significantly. It doesn't have to stay as trafficking. Or if it becomes attempted trafficking, then the laws, the penalties that I talked about before with the mandatory minimums, all of a sudden they come off. And so it's a whole different approach. Mm-hmm. I'll look at that. I'll look at whether or not there's some sort of legal constitutional issue that we can really hone in on. That happens too, and there's a certain strategy on how to approach DAs and U.S. attorneys about those potential issues. Sometimes they have to be litigated, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can be mitigating enough that it gets, I've had drug trafficking cases all of a sudden come down to possession offenses that were eligible for deferred prosecution because the person had never been in trouble before, but there were significant constitutional issues in the case, and now all of a sudden we're in a whole different landscape. And then you have others where you don't have any of that, okay? And you're working with an issue where, all the evidence is really adding up to a probable conviction, and you're looking at, well, what are my other options? Is cooperation in some form or fashion an option? Is rehab an option? There's all sorts of things that could potentially be available. But again, that ends up becoming a case-by-case basis.
When you say cooperation, is that sort of like, helping them get bigger fish or something like that?
Yes, and that can take upon many forms. That can be as simple as providing information in a proffer scenario, like sitting down with authorities and hammering that out. That certainly happens, and we do that, and I've been a part of that. It also can shake out where somebody is literally out of custody and working with authorities as some form of confidential informant. And we've set that stuff up too, when that's been able to happen or when we found that to be fruitful. That is a significant decision and an undertaking that someone has to make. And we've had to have those very difficult conversations with people and their families.
Yeah, that's a tough one because not everybody's cut out for that. I don't know. I'm a pretty confident guy, but I don't know if I could wear a wire. I think that would be hard for me.
Yeah. And it's not quite like that, but yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. All right. That's super fascinating stuff. Really appreciate that, Dylan. And that's it for today's episode of For the Record with Greenwood Law. If you'd like to learn more about attorney Dylan Greenwood and his work at Greenwood Law, visit dwg-law.com. You'll find helpful resources about criminal defense in North Carolina, from state charges to federal cases. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've got lots of awesome information coming your way, and we'll learn more and more about Dylan and his practice. Dylan, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.